On this episode of Big Sky Now, we discuss the Big Sky players currently in the NFL that have made practice squads. Then we reviewed the exciting Week 1 games that had some of us on the edge of our seats. We finished the show previewing Week 2 and our picks of the week. Before we start, I want to give a special thank you to M&C Tires for sponsoring this podcast. Let's get into it. Welcome, everyone. I am Luke Schmit, your host of the Big Sky Now podcast. I am very delighted today to have the pleasure of being joined by Daily Interlake sports editor Fritz Neighbor, Daily Interlake sports reporter Jon Allen, and Coeur d'Alene sports editor Mark Nelke. Let's not waste any time, guys, and get right into it. Before we talk about Week 1, I know some were curious. I want to bring up that Montana State's Tommy Mellott and Montana's Junior Bergen were waived from their NFL teams before the season started. Also, former Glacier and Montana football standout Patrick O'Connell was waived. O'Connell was brought back to the Seahawks practice squad, as well as Bergen for the Niners. Fritz, I want to hear from you first. What's your reaction maybe to Mellott not making the practice squad for the Raiders?
Yeah, if I had to rank my surprise, I was most surprised when O'Connell was cut because he had a really good preseason. And then after that is Mellott. I thought for sure he'd stick on the practice squad. I mean, he's drafted, and draftees have a certain salary slot that they fit into. And I found the press conference from Spytech, the GM for the Raiders, and partly it was a numbers game. He was part of a big group of receivers they brought in, and all those guys except for Mellott had played a lot of receiver in college, and they all came through it healthy. So when it came down to getting down to 53 for active roster and 17 on the practice squad, he wasn't there. So it's kind of too bad because I think when he was a true freshman at MSU, he was doing the same thing he did during the preseason. He was kind of flitting here and there and playing well on special teams. So Bergen I was less surprised about because he dropped a punt, but I kind of thought he would wind up on the practice squad. And he did, and I just thought Mellott would wind up on the practice squad as well.
Yeah, for Mellott, like you said, came down to experience. Hopefully he gets another shot. Jon, let's talk about O'Connell. As we just said, he had a great preseason, but we're talking about your Seahawks, so I'll let you give your opinion on if you were surprised, especially he didn't make the 53.
Yeah, I was definitely a bit surprised that he didn't end up on the roster. Like Fritz mentioned, he was a great kind of a standout for the Seahawks in the preseason. He led the team in tackles there in their final game. I think he was joint tied for most tackles there in game 2 against the Chiefs. So I think he had 11 tackles just between those 2 games. I am a bit surprised that he didn't end up on the roster, but it's kind of what happened to him last year too. He ended up on the practice squad. Some injuries happened. He ended up playing. I think he ended up on the roster for about 9 of these 18 games. I could be wrong, 9 of 17. But he did get some playing time in there at the end of the season, especially.
Mark, anything you wanted to add before we jump over to Week 1 after hearing some of this news?
Yeah, I'm kind of like Fritz. I was kind of surprised Mellott didn't at least make the practice squad. Seems like he's kind of a unique talent. He's not just a receiver. He can do a lot of other things, and it seems like they'd want to keep him around, see what they could do, down the road. As a 49er fan, I was kind of hoping Bergen would make the roster. I'm happy he's on the practice squad. I mean, obviously, they didn't value him that much as a receiver because they kept bringing in other receivers when they were injured and stuff like that. So his value to them is obviously as a kick returner or punt returner. And we saw the one where in the first game he broke the one. And that looked good. He had another one in the last game where it was a short kick and it bounced and he caught it on the run and he almost broke that one. And there was a shoestring tackle. So I think the 49ers, I don't think they returned a punt for a touchdown, maybe since, before they joined the NFL, but that's a place if they trust him enough. Shanahan doesn't really trust rookies that much, but he could help him as a punt returner, although they brought in Sky Moore to return punts. So So what do we know? But I think he has value as a punt returner if they kind of give him a chance, because they kind of need, that would help them, that because usually they just catch punts or they let them land or something. They don't ever get any big plays on kick returns.
Yeah, and like you just said about Malott, I was surprised, like you said, because I thought he could be used, especially in that offense, not having a good couple of years, as a gadget kind of player. Can throw the ball. He's fast. I was very surprised, at least the practice squad, especially for the draft pick not making it there. And then, yeah, I thought Bergen, when I watched versus my Broncos, he actually had, like you said, great punt return. I thought that game was kind of his coming out party to possibly make the team. But like you said, I think when it comes down to rookies, Shanahan made his decision, but ultimately wish those guys still the best of luck. Their chapters just turned and they've got lots of time left. So let's jump over to our recap of week 1. We finally had a full weekend of football in the Big Sky. A few games went as anticipated, and some of them were closer than we thought. Fritz, I'll start with you. I want to hear maybe your takeaway from the Montana State-Oregon game and anything else that caught your eye.
Well, I kind of thought the Cats would play that game a little closer. They kind of been tending to reload on up front. They have 2 really good running backs. I know they're mixing in somebody new at quarterback, and Oregon's for real. We all know that Oregon's really got a good program. I did notice, I was listening to the game on the radio while I was at work, and they started a freshman, Braden Zimmer, at left tackle, which seems a really maybe one of the toughest spots to start a freshman. The guy that was ahead of him was just a sophomore, but I think he suffered a broken hand. And Braden Zimmer's uncle used to be a sports editor of the Billings Gazette. Was my boss.
Oh, wow.
And his dad, Brad, was still hanging around Billings too. So I know the family, and good for him getting a start. But talking about being thrown into the fire. I was interested to see Sac State, our beloved Hornets, kind of fall flat over there in Brookings. They lost 20-3, but I don't think the game was that close. It's 28 first downs to 7. It was 430 yards of offense to 130. The only 3 points that the Hornets got were a gift because SDSU fumbled in its own end, and SDSU also fumbled going in on their first possession, going into the end zone. So, and then I'm very disappointed in my Bengals. I just thought they would pull the big upset, and instead they gave up 560 some yards to Southern Utah, future Big Sky Conference rival Southern Utah. So there wasn't much to talk about as far as the Big Sky goes, really. I mean, Eastern had their game tied 21-all, but then they lost by 10. And I just wish there was more to talk about that was positive after that first week.
Definitely. Yeah, it's definitely tough. Those scheduling can be tough for a couple of those teams. We'll have Mark talk about it with Idaho, but I'll let Jon go first. Jon, the floor is yours. What did you find interesting, and how much stock should we really put into these week 1 results? What do you think?
I mean, it depends on the game. Montana State going up against Oregon, as Fritz mentioned. Oregon's for real, and they're the top end of the Big Ten and the FBS. The Bobcats aren't going to look at that game and go, "Oh, our season's over because we lost by 45." No, it's just going to be, take what you can, learn what you learn, and take it against South Dakota State this week. So I kind of was impressed. The whole game itself offensively for Montana State wasn't great, but I was impressed with Lamson's accuracy. I think he was 22 of 29 in the game. So against a solid defense, the offensive line, didn't exactly help him out in that. Mateo Uyunglele for Oregon is just a different beast, different animal than the Bobcats are going to see. So that was difficult for him. But when he was able to get passes off, he seemed accurate. The rushing game struggled, but again, difficult defensive line for the Ducks. Eastern kind of surprised me with how they held in with Incarnate Word. That one I would put a little more stock into just because of, FCS on FCS, Incarnate Word struggling to start the season. So I don't know how much we can take from how good Eastern is, but they stayed in the game for a little while there. And even though, looking at the stats, I couldn't really get to watch any of it, but Incarnate Word outgained them by almost 200 yards, and Eastern's points all came in one quarter. So not exactly sure how even it was on the field, but looking at the stat, the final score, it seems closer. Sac State definitely needs work. Fritz mentioned, outgained by 300 yards, 20-7 in first downs to South Dakota State. I think the Jackrabbits are a great team, but I think Sac State is it's still the question mark. We talked about it all preseason. They were 6th in the Big Sky, and then they're preseason ranked in the top 15. And so, yeah, right there. And then, Mark will talk about it a little bit, I'm sure, with Idaho, but that was a heck of a comeback there at the end against the Cougs. And a couple plays go their way. They're heading back to Moscow with a win. So.
Yeah, jumping right over to Mark. Mark, tell me about your reaction to that Idaho Vandals having another close season opener versus an FBS team, and also talk to me about Idaho State losing after their strong showing in week 1 versus UNLV.
Yeah, well, all FCS versus FBS games are not created equal. Montana State at Oregon is a little different than Idaho WSU, especially these days. I kind of expected a close game between Idaho and the WSU Jackrabbit Cougars, with their 16 players from South Dakota State and their coach from there. So, it was. I figured it'd be close. There wasn't a lot of offense. Both teams barely over 200 yards. Washington State rushes for 3 yards in the whole game. Idaho passed. They finished with 33 passing yards, and that was counting in that minus 17 yards on that last pitchy woo play that with the lateral stuff. But still, 50 yards of passing isn't very impressive. So their defense obviously played well against WSU, except for the two drives that WSU went up tempo and scored. Idaho punted 5 times, and all of them were in WSU territory, which is kind of crazy. I mean, I looked at all of the situations, and there really wasn't one where you'd look at and go, oh, maybe they should have went for it. There was a 4th and 5 at the 49, maybe, but the rest one was 12, one was 21, one was 13, one was 4th and 10. So there kind of wasn't, there wasn't a situation where maybe they were being conservative. It was just kind of, you don't see that much where people punt from the other team's territory usually anymore. You just kind of go for it because you figure you can get the ball back and stuff like that. Then I thought about Jason Eck when Idaho had that 4th and 4 at the 3 or whatever it was at the end when they had after the fumble return. And Thomas Ford elects to kick the field goal, and that's fine. Play for a tie and overtime and stuff like that. We've watched X teams the last 3 years go for it on 4th down quite a bit, and sometimes they'd fake punt and do that kind of stuff. So as it turns out, they tied the game and then gave up the game losing drive. So you can look at that and say, oh, that was a bad idea, but that was the decision they made, and that's the way it goes, and you live with it. So, talking about Eastern, I guess you can be impressed with an Eastern defense that only gave up 463 yards. But that was pretty good for them and holding up against Incarnate Word. So maybe there's hope for the future. They only had 290, I think it was. So that's not very Eastern like either. So. Idaho State, Fritz's Bengals. I was kind of disappointed, but that seems that we've talked about that before. That kind of happens with them. They play a great game, and then they do that, and get outgained 563 to 361. And it was kind of like that was a game that they could back up a good game with another good game, and they didn't. The other thing that tells me is Southern Utah is pretty good. Utah Tech playing UC Davis tough. They're pretty good. So the Big Sky's going to be okay when vaunted Sac State in their 3 points last week leaves the conference after this season. I think we'll be okay in the Big Sky.
Yeah, so long.
That just me right over to you, Fritz. Which Big Sky team, if you had to pick one, impressed you the most this last week?
Well, I'll start with NEU. Even though I couldn't watch the game, I really wanted to watch them play my Sun Devils. I was at ASU for a semester before I transferred to the U of M. But I thought they played them pretty tough. They had fewer penalties. They had more time of possession. I know they made it close with a score in the final 20 seconds. So the final was 38-19, but I think the quarterback Pennington held up pretty well. And like I said, it was kind of a rough weekend for finding positives. So
Yeah.
the real winner last weekend, Montana, the Montana Grizzlies.
Yeah.
No weaknesses. Didn't see a single weakness.
No
Nothing
injury.
to really work on. So I'll throw it over to the rest of you guys.
That's fine. That's great. And you are right. Can't say you're wrong about that. John, which team, if there is one, do you expect maybe to bounce back after their losses last week?
Yeah, I don't know exactly when it comes to a final score, but I fully expect Montana State to, go out and put together a good performance back at home. Another difficult opponent in South Dakota State. We saw what they did against Sacramento State this last week. So that'll be an interesting one to see just how they do rebound and play. I definitely don't expect it to end up in the same way that their game against Oregon did. Idaho, I feel like, has a good bounce back game against St. Thomas this week. The Tommies are, they're not a slouch, but they're still kind of making that move up from D3 when they got forced out and everything. But they've settled in nicely to the FCS level. I don't think that they're a top level team yet, though. So I think that sets up good for the Vandals to get a rebound. And Northern Arizona getting to host Utah Tech. We saw them last week. The Trailblazers, went up 24-7 against UC Davis, and Davis rallied back to win that one. So Utah Tech's no slouch, but Lumberjacks getting to hopefully establish this home field advantage we talked about that Fritz says that they should have, but never seem to take advantage of. So let's see if they can establish that early and get rolling, because they're one of my picks to win the Big Sky this year.
Yeah. And Mark, last part of here, week one, in your opinion, was there a team or a player maybe that had an underrated performance that we haven't talked about yet, or anything that caught your eye before I give my recap and we move on?
Maybe a couple. I mean, we kind of talked about NAU playing ASU tough. That, NAU's coming off a good year and got big plans for this year. So that was nice to see them, keep up with them. San Diego State, the San Diego State Jackrabbit, former Cougars or soon to be Cougars and stuff like that. Still pretty good. I mean, you lose 17 guys. I mean, Idaho has had that happen the last couple of years, and they've reloaded. So kudos to South Dakota State for reloading. I mean, they also lost their quarterback too. Gronowski to Iowa, and I watched one of the running backs that Angel Williams play for WSU against Idaho. So kudos to them against vaunted Sacramento State. Shout out to Matthias McLean from Priest River, Idaho, in our neck of the woods. He forced the fumble that almost led to Idaho scoring the go-ahead touchdown. And coaches, I can't say what he said about him in the presser afterward, but he said he was a quote unquote, expletive dude. So, and I'll play you the tape if you want to hear it. But he's high on him. He was high on him in the preseason, and he expects a lot of big things from him in the future. And so remember the name, Matthias McLean, number 89 for Idaho.
Definitely remember the name and be looking out for him this season. For my recap, I'll piggyback a little bit what's slightly been said, and we'll keep going. Most player I was impressed with Taco Dowler, watching him this week. I thought, obviously, Oregon was in some safe coverages, so he was getting some under routes, and I thought his speed and his quickness, it's no joke. And I think there could be a problem for some Big Sky teams this year in their secondaries with Dowler. He definitely impressed me. We already talked about Idaho, but I picked them last week in our picks, and they were so close to giving me the edge on you guys. So that game had me on my edge of my seat. I thought that was going to possibly be an upset. Their run defense looked very solid. Like we said, 3 total rushing yards on 22 carries, but Joshua Wood only having 33 passing yards is kind of where the Cougars took the edge back on that game. Northern Colorado was able to start the season 1-0, and guest of this show, Peter Costelli, threw for 1 touchdown and ran in another. So for me, that was personally great to see, and glad the Bears are able to start their season well before getting into Big Sky, and we'll see how they compete then. Wrapping up my recap, UC Davis, just like John said, scoring 24 unanswered points, quieted the doubt I was about to speak on that team for this podcast. So props to them for bouncing back and having a big game versus Washington next week. And Big Sky Offensive Player of the Week, Ty Diffenbach, had 300 total rushing and throwing yards, 3 touchdowns over San Diego. So I thought maybe he could be a dark horse for this season in the Big Sky Awards. It was great to see that, and I'll have more respect picking them as I picked San Diego last week. Let's jump now to next week. We have some very fun matchups to discuss. Week 2 features South Dakota State traveling to Bozeman, take on the Bobcats for their Gold Rush game, and Montana opens their season versus Central Washington at home. And I can't forget about Eastern Washington going to the Blue Turf and playing Boise State Friday night. So, Fritz, I'll jump with you again. Let's hear what games you'll be watching out for and talk to me about Montana's first game of the season. I know you've been down there for practice.
Yeah. Well, first of all, congrats on the Luke Schmit bump to the UNC quarterback. Maybe that can be a weekly thing. You can just give everybody a bump and a win. I'll be at the Griz game Saturday night, and they're playing a D2 team, but Central Washington has been pretty good again. A few years ago during the COVID pandemic, Montana only played 2 games in the spring of 2021, and one of them was Central Washington, and the Griz won 59-3. However, in 2008, Central Washington came in with a quarterback named Riley from Flathead High, and the Griz barely scraped by 38-35. Griz lost in the title game, FCS title game that year, and Central Washington lost to the eventual D2 champion in the playoffs by 1, Northwest Missouri State. So I think this Central Washington team is a lot closer to that 2008 team than the 21 team. They got a guy named Kennedy McGill at quarterback who I think he ran for 140 and threw for 190 last week last Thursday, and they beat up on Colorado Mesa, and so he's a 3-star recruit who didn't fall to the Wildcats. He was actually just came there straight out of high school, and they have an Idaho transfer, plenty of those around. Jalen Grable caught one of his long touchdown passes. A Wazoo transfer caught the other one, named Mason Jurgens. I think they're going to be fun to watch. I think Ayat will be the starting quarterback. I could probably ballpark the starters on defense, but there's going to be 11 of them, new ones. So it'll be interesting. I think the Griz will be playing in front of a packed house. I think we just got a release that they're sold out for the whole season. So it'll be tough for the Wildcats to handle that, and I think the Griz will be favored, but I think it'll be a good game.
Yeah, and like you said, Griz home openers usually have good success, but like you said, Central Washington might have something up their sleeve with a good team this year. Let's jump over to Jon. Jon, maybe tell me a game that some Big Sky fans keep their eyes on that's not jumping off the screen at first, and maybe any other games you're ready to watch.
Yeah, well, I've been very vocal with dunking on Sac State, but I do think that they'd be one to watch this week, taking on Nevada. If you're going to look for a Big Sky over FBS game, which there are a lot of this week, that's the one to take the Big Sky team, in my opinion. The Wolfpack have kind of had some off years recently in the Mountain West. They got destroyed and came apart against Penn State last weekend. So, I definitely think Sac State might be able to march into Reno and come out victorious. We'll see. It's still early season. They're still figuring things out. Whole new roster there in Sacramento State. So, yeah, I think that's one to watch. A couple other ones I feel like maybe not going to be upset worthy, but should keep it close. I like UC Davis against Washington as a late night pick. That's the Huskies struggled last year under Jed Fish, and they didn't look exactly convincing early on against Colorado State a week ago. Of course, UC Davis needed the comeback to take down Utah Tech. But we saw them come out strong against Mercer in week 0 in the game that didn't count. Apart from that, let's see, I had one more. Oh yeah, it was Eastern. I don't think that this Boise State team's as good as everyone thought preseason. They kind of fell flat on their face against South Florida last week. And, Eastern, while it may not have been the most, best performance offensively, I don't think Jared Taylor had a very good game throwing. But I feel like Eastern could go in there and be able to hold their own on offense. It's just whether or not they'll be able to keep up with Boise State, because the defense still isn't exactly, a top Big Sky level defense that we think of. So.
Thanks, Jon. And Mark, tell me about the Idaho State matchups this week and any other games you're turning into.
I guess start with Idaho against the University of St. Thomas Tommies, who are now eligible for the FCS playoffs for the first year. After transitioning up, like you guys talked about, from D3 to D1 in 2021. They're in the Pioneer Football League with some other powerhouses like Drake, San Diego, Butler, Valparaiso, and stuff like that. So it's a chance for Idaho. It's their home opener, and even though it's, coming off a WSU game, they should still be pretty fired up, playing at home, and maybe a chance for Joshua Wood to get kind of on track, get the passing game going. They're running game is pretty good. Defense is fine and stuff like that. So it's a chance for maybe Idaho to, feel good about a game and put a hurting on somebody. Idaho State at the New Mexico former Vandals / Lobos with their 7 Idaho transfers and their coach Jason X. So if Cody Hawkins thought he was done coaching against Jason Eck, he was, after losing to him 3 years in a row, he was mistaken, because he gets to coach against them again. And New Mexico, I didn't see much of that game against Michigan, but 34-17 doesn't look too bad. Jack Lane with 208 yards passing and a touchdown, and guy from UNEC, Scottre Humphrey from Montana State.
Yeah.
Running the ball there. So I think it could be another could be an 0-3 start for Idaho State. Was supposed to be a promising season, and it may still be, but it could be a tough start. John mentioned Eastern at Boise State, which in the past, had the makings of a track meet. I think Boise State, after not playing very well last week, is going to come back. They're kind of a different animal on the blue turf. They'll probably wear their blue jerseys where you can't recognize them against the blue turf and stuff like that. And I think they'll unfortunately put a hurting on the Eastern and kind of get well. Maddox Madsen and the guys. I think they'll bounce back with a big win on Friday night while we're off covering high school football. They'll be beating up on Eastern down there on the blue turf.
Yeah, battle of the red turf versus the blue turf. I didn't even think about that. That's pretty funny. Fritz, you talked about the Montana game. I forgot to ask you, what's a game you think that might be closer than some think? What are you looking at when you're looking at the entire scoreboard this weekend?
Well, I think I wasn't real high on Utah Tech, but I think the NU game with Utah Tech will be a little tighter than I would imagine a couple weeks ago. If I had to pick an upset, I'd probably pick Sac State again over Nevada. Nevada, it's no crime to get beat at Penn State by 4 touchdowns, but that's where Jeff Schote landed after he fled MSU. Sac State's, trying to talk themselves into being a D1 program, and so far so not good. So it really would be an upset if they went over and won at Nevada. So that's my one upset pick. Everything else kind of falls into place.
Yeah. I think we've really covered it all. And, I think true Big Sky fans are going to have their eyes on the Cats opener for South Dakota State, as we said. Dan Jackson picked up his first collegiate win last week. So he's in a battle in Bozeman to try and get his second. But I'll be looking at that one for sure. And I'm excited to get to our next segment. Let's do our picks, and I'll recap how everyone did before you give your picks. We'll start with our defending champion of last year, Fritz. Fritz went 9 for 11 last week. Only games not correct were the Idaho State and Eastern Washington games they've lost. Let's hear your picks, Fritz.
Okay, well, I will pick Boise over Eastern, and I'll pick the Lobos over the Bengals. I'll pick Idaho over the Purple Tommies of St. Thomas, who just picked up their first D1 win last week. I'll pick there's my upset special, Sac State over Nevada. That's dumb. I don't think that's going to work. But NEU over Utah Tech, Utah over Cal Poly. Shout out to Cal Poly, and shout out to you, Luke, for mentioning that they did pick up one of the few Big Sky wins last week. CSU over Northern Colorado. I've got North Dakota over Portland State, which got beat 59-0 last week. Go Vikings. Griz over the Central Washington Wildcats. I'll pick the Cats over the Jackrabbits, Arizona over Weaver State, and finally, I will pick Washington over UC Davis.
Perfect. John, you went 10 for 11 last week. Only game that was not correctly was you picked San Diego to beat Cal Poly. I did the same as well. So still very impressive by you, 10 for 11. Great. Let's hear what you got this week.
Yeah, the bold choice of picking Southern Utah. I think I was the only one that went different on that one. So gives me a little edge. Although I will say I'm disappointed. Last year I think we were much better off on that first week than we did this year, guys. So Boise State, I think they'll beat Eastern on Friday night. I've got New Mexico over Idaho State as well. Idaho over St. Thomas. I'm going to go with Nevada over Sac State. I do think that'll be close, though. I think Sac State has the best chance to win, but I don't think that they will. Northern Arizona over Utah Tech. Utah over Cal Poly. Colorado State over Northern Colorado. North Dakota over Portland State. Montana over Central Washington. I love Fritz getting the shout out in for Edmonton Elks legend Mike Riley.
Yeah.
South Dakota State, I'm picking them to beat Montana State, though I do think that is going to be a good game. The difference could come down to, being at home for Montana State. It could very well give the Cats the edge there, especially with Gold Rush game. The students are going to be rocking. It's going to be quite the scene down in Bozeman this week, I think. I've got Arizona over Weaver State and Washington over UC Davis.
Absolutely. And Mark, you also went 10 for 11. Only game wrong was Idaho State to win. So you guys are all hot out of the gate. I am already losing, so I need to be better and can't allow you guys to beat me as the host. But I'll keep going. Mark, go ahead and give us your picks.
All righty. It was a lot of home teams picked this week. Boise State to beat Eastern, New Mexico to beat Idaho State, Idaho to beat St. Thomas. I'm going to take Nevada over Sac State, hoping my friend Jeff Choate kind of gets it going there in his second year. Northern Arizona to beat Utah Tech, Utah over Cal Poly, Colorado State over Northern Colorado. Not Portland State. North Dakota to beat Portland State. I think you guys are awake.
Yeah.
Stop my heart.
That's right. Wait, Bruce Barnum's on line one. Hang on a sec. Montana over Central Washington. I thought about South Dakota State, but that would be a big win. If they can go into Bozeman and beat Montana State, that would be huge. That might be more telling about Montana State. But I'm gonna take, like you guys said, the Montana State at home, maybe game under their belt with a lot of new faces. We'll go with Montana State, Arizona to beat Weber, and as much as the Huskies tend to lay an egg sometimes in these games, I'm going to take them to find a way past UC Davis.
Right. Thank you, Mark. Real quick, I'll go over Mike last week went 9 for 11. I'll do his give his picks really quick. That's a tongue twister. And this week he's going to take Boise over Eastern, New Mexico defeating Idaho State, and Utah Tech over NAU, Idaho beating St. Thomas, Nevada over Sac State, Utah beating Cal Poly, North Dakota winning over Portland State, Colorado State beating Northern Colorado. He has Montana winning its season opener, and he thinks the Cats will take advantage of the home field advantage that they have, just like you said. Arizona over Weber, and finally Washington beating UC Davis. So for my picks, I went in last place already. I went 8 for 11. I tried to get that Idaho game and see if I could have one up on you guys, but it didn't work. I'll keep doing my research to try and find my one up. But this week I'm not taking any crazy upsets. My incorrect games were just San Diego, Idaho, Idaho State last week. I'm going to pick Boise State winning at home over the Eagles, New Mexico over Idaho State. I will take Idaho over St. Thomas, and Nevada beating Sac State in a close one. Utah Tech did impress me last week, but I'm going to ride the tie betting train one more week and take Northern Arizona at home. Utah over Cal Poly, and Colorado State over Northern Colorado. I haven't seen anything yet to take Portland State, so I will definitely be taking North Dakota at home. Montana is very good, as we said, in their home openers. I'm going to take the Griz to win at Washington Grizzly Stadium Saturday. Arizona over Weber, and Washington beating UC Davis in a closer one than I think some will predict. And my last pick of the week, which should be the best to watch in my opinion, will be the Bobcats taking down South Dakota State in the Gold Rush. I think it's going to be an insane environment. First time they've played there since the championship. So I think they're going to be a very rowdy group, and it's going to be a very fun game to watch. But that was a lot of games to go through, so I do thank you guys for sticking with me. That does do it for this week's episode of Big Sky Now. Please like and subscribe and leave any comments or questions or any of your predictions as well. I want to give a special thanks to Fritz, Jon, and Mark for making time on their Labor Day to join me. And we will see you all after week 2. Thank you so much.
M&C Tire in Kalispell has been locally owned since 1979. From urban avenues to untamed trails, M&C Tire will help you conquer any terrain. Unleash the power within your ride. Stop into M&C Tire at 1271 North Meridian Road in Kalispell or mnctire.com. M&C Tire, wherever you go, we've got you covered.